Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Erica Reacts. This is an interview episode about the Grateful Dead, Deadhead, or so we'll find out soon. And today we are meeting with Rex. And we're just going to get started. I guess I like to just leave it really open ended. And I think the best way to start, we're talking about the Dead, is tell me how you got into the Dead. And let's just start at the beginning.
Okay, cool. Thanks for having me, Erica. I've noticed some of your stuff. Congratulations on your channel and the things that you've been doing. And I see that you've been interviewing people. I see that you're putting basically it's reaction video stuff and I have some questions for you later on about
Oh,
that.
yeah, I would love that. I would love it.
Yeah, because it's everybody finds that intriguing and seems to pull a lot of people in to see stuff like that. But I think I told you on the side, and I'll mention this. I'll maybe start with this: is that my first show was 1977, and it was a pretty famous show in the Deadhead circles, which is Englishtown, New Jersey, September 3rd, 1977.
And these are the
And it,
photos. I could bring up the photos at the
oh
same
yeah,
time.
sure, you
So
could bring up some photos
he's,
that I sent you.
yeah.
These are not my photos, by the way.
Oh,
So
okay, okay.
I didn't take these photos. I was 14 at the time. And so I was a youngin, and it was my first Dead show. In fact, it may have even been one of my first, rock and roll shows. I think before that, I had only seen, a handful of shows. I think I saw Blue Oyster Cult or something like that, in a local venue in my town. And but the reason that I had found myself going to that show when I was 14 is I've got three older brothers, and they were all into the Grateful Dead and Allman Brothers and the band and all the hippie stuff, and so obviously it trickled down. I got into the Dead in high school a little bit away from them. I mean, I heard them playing the music all the time and all sorts of other stuff along that goes along with Grateful Dead, like all my brothers. And I knew that they were going to shows. My oldest brother, his first show was Watkins Glen, which is another famous Dead show, which was with the band and Allman Brothers. And so there was a lot of years that they were already into it, and so I picked up on that. And when I was in school and at home, I would listen to the Dead and got familiar with their stuff, their albums, cassettes, eight tracks back in that day was eight tracks, and Terrapin Station had just come out, so 77, and and so I'd been hearing that for a little while, and it was great. Before that was Wake of the Flood. Really got into that. Beautiful album. And I really didn't expect that I would even be seeing them at the age of 14, but somehow or another, my brothers decided that they were going to this show, and they were all going. Like my older brother was going with his friends, and my other two brothers just above me, they were going with a couple of friends, but one of their friends backed out of a ticket, I think. And I'm sitting around and I'm like, I wasn't thinking much. And to tell you the truth, I think it was we're sitting around the house, and somehow or another, my mother picked up on it in our conversations, and she went in the living room and she's like, oh, why don't you bring your brother? And I thought that was a surprise to me. And as soon as I heard that, I sort of said, "Well, okay, I'm in her corner on this one. Let's see how they go for it." Nah, that it wasn't received too quickly. Little brother hopping along for that ride, but over the course of a few hours and a day, yeah, I got in. I was on that bus and in that car, an old Pontiac, 72 Pontiac, with a couple of people and a couple of their friends and me. And so yeah, we hopped on we lived on Long Island at the time. We hopped in this car. We hopped on a Jersey Turnpike and we went to the show. And it was a hot, hot day in September 3rd, and it was so hot and humid, and I didn't know what to expect. And I get there, and we had to park 8 miles away from the show. because it was, yeah, there turned out to be so many people at this show. There were a lot more people than expected. As I say, it's a pretty historic show. A lot was written about this show, and it was called the Summer's End concert, and so we we wound up having to park about 8 miles away from the show, and everybody else was parking 8 miles away from the show. As you could probably see from some of those photos that I sent you, it was a hell of a crowd. And back then, you don't have the conveniences that you do today. You don't have air conditioning. You don't have good coolers. You don't have even bottled water. It was a whole different scene
Yeah.
to get what you to get where you wanted to and to maintain even hydration and so we wound up so we wound up having to walk 8 miles. That was a little bit of a surprise that we had to park. The parking lot just got so full. They didn't expect that many people. It got so full so fast that people had to park on lawns. And I forget what township it was in Englishtown, but it was right outside Englishtown. And the townspeople were so cool. We were parking on their lawns, and they had their sprinklers out, and they were just cool people. And they didn't expect they hadn't seen this before because it was a raceway, it was a car, it was a racetrack
Hmm.
that it was at. So they held town races and stuff, but all of a sudden it was opened up for a big huge concert. I think they expected maybe 50,000. They got about 125,000. So that was a bit of a shocker to the townspeople, and but they were cool about it. And I remember at one point there was we're walking, and there was this guy in a Toyota who was giving people rides, charging a couple bucks to give people rides for about a mile. So if you didn't want to walk, you could maybe coerce someone to who had a car that lived within that area to take you a mile and charge you a few bucks. Cut maybe 2 miles, cut a little time off your walk. So we did that. We crammed in about 8 people into a small Toyota Corolla, and it was more of a laugh, more of a joke than it was transportation. We didn't get too far. We hopped out and we continued our walk. So um, so we finally got there. The way the show was set up was they had train cars that were sort of uh, from the stage out like this. That's how that's what their guardrails were. That's what their fences were. These big box cars,
Wow.
and you can see maybe from some of those pictures, but other pictures that are online, it's like these big train box cars, and um, and then there was just a fence that was in the front, and you come in, and nobody checked our tickets. My ticket was $6.50, I think. Yeah,
That's crazy.
and nobody checked their tickets, and it was just an open day from that. It was a free for all from that point. I remember just to cut to after the show, we walked out of so many bags of garbage. There was just bottles and cans of garbage bags, and what seemed like a half a mile or a mile just walking over these garbage cans and stuff. And that's the introduction that you get back in the 70s to a show that is that's pretty raw. Your experience isn't what it is today. You don't have conveniences, like you don't have people selling merchandise. You don't have people selling water. You don't have people selling falafel sandwiches
Well, even
and
just
and things.
Ubers or pedicabs. Like when I was at the Hollywood Bowl, there's people that just pedicab people up the hill all day. So it's like,
Yeah.
you didn't have a formalized Uber or like some kind of transportation. It just
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
that.
absolutely.
But there was no shakedown yet. Like there wasn't like
No, there didn't
yeah.
need to be.
Uh huh.
At that point, it was the whole thing was shaken. I mean, everything was. There wasn't a specific shakedown area.
And do you think
Um,
all these people found out about it? Because like the interviews I was doing earlier, they said there was like a phone number, or they would announce it on the radio, and people would mail in for tickets with a return envelope. Like, what do you think?
oh yeah, well that was definitely that was the thing through the 70s for sure. The way that started. Um, the Dead. We could get into talking about this, but the Dead had so many different phases of their career. from the psychedelic 60s to this, if you want to really just go by era, I mean by decades, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and all of them were different. But the great thing about their catalog and the way that they approached their catalog live was that they didn't drop things, like they didn't drop songs to move on to something new. So many bands today and back then, they would have an album and they'd go out and they'd tour and they'd promote the album.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, they would promote, they would play an album. Sometimes they'd play songs off an album way before it came out because they're testing it out. U.S. Blues, that they played that a couple of years before Mars Hotel came out. But it was a total mishmash with what they wanted to play and how they wanted to play it and when they wanted to play it, and they weren't really set in any way of saying, oh, here's an album, let's go tour it, let's go play that album. I think at that English Sound show they played only about 3-4 tracks from Terrapin Station. They did all of Terrapin Station Suite, but yeah, they didn't play the whole thing, and of course they mixed it up with all sorts of other stuff.
Okay. Well,
Everything
yeah. I mean, I
struck
like I
into.
like that. So that kind of became the thing where instead of just being like, "Oh, we're promoting an album," they would play the things that people really wanted to hear at
They
every
would play the
show.
things that people had been hearing already. By '77, they'd already been playing in front of people for 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
as the Grateful Dead, and years before that as the Warlocks, which you may know about. And
I
then
heard a little bit.
I
Yes.
had just sent you something called the Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Band.
Yes.
And that at some point, if you listen to that, it's a jug band. So it's Jerry and it's Bob, and Bob was probably 16 years old, and Pigpen, and two other guys, and they had a love for folk music and bluegrass music, and Jerry was a guitar teacher, as you may know, and so they came out in '64 doing just jamming on folk music and jug band music and just crazy weird shit with kazoos and all sorts of weird stuff, and that recording that they did in '64 at the top of the Tangent, which was above a pizza parlor, really excellent recording considering it was '64. I forget who it was that recorded it, but knew a little bit, friends of Jerry's or something like that. But you asked about how people knew about a show like in '77. In i- in the '60s, people would you know in the '60s when they would play in Golden Gate Park, it was word of mouth. People in San
Mm.
Francisco would say, "Hey," they wake up in the morning and go, "Hey, I heard a Room of the Dead going to be playing at Panhandle, at noon, 3 o'clock, and so that was small community, Haight Ashbury, so people found out, people knew, but and it was mostly like that, but in '72, when they came out with Europe '72, on the back of the album, if you ever see the back of the album, it says Dead Freaks Unite, and there's information on the back that says there's like a fan club, Dead Freaks Unite, and there was a phone number, and at that you call that phone number and you could find out about the upcoming tour, and that's where you would find out about later on mailing in for tickets and that kind of thing. But I mean, that '77 tour, that '77 show was at the end of their summer tour, and so people knew about it by word of mouth and whatnot. But yeah, that was pretty interesting that they had put in 1972 on the back of their Europe album, Dead Freaks Unite, and it was a connection. It was a real way to connect to the band. Kind of unique at the time. I don't really think anybody else had ever done something like that.
Right. Like early
Um,
marketing, they could do a class on like the marketing of the dead.
oh, yeah,
And were
for
you, I
sure.
mean, you were 14. Had you been going to other concerts in New York City since you were like a city kid? Or was this like kind of your first,
Yeah, I was.
like,
I had mentioned that. I think I went. Well, I know I went to see Blue Oyster Cult. Was one of my first shows that I saw when I was like 12 or 13, and that was at it was a place called Long Island Arena, and it
mm,
was a small arena, that was in Comac, and they had pretty big shows. Peter Frampton. They had 10 years after. They would have shows. It was also a flea market. So when it wasn't a concert venue, it was an ice skating rink or a flea market. So it was a pretty unique place. And so yeah, I have been going to shows, but just a couple, and that was local. So this was definitely taking me out of my local element as a kid and bringing me into the scene,
Right. I guess it's the
which
suburbs kind of because it's a racetrack. I mean, it was like
yeah,
out there.
it was a racetrack. God, who wouldn't know? You wouldn't know it was a racetrack showing up there. It was just a massive amount of people, and they were obviously most of them were all older than me. You know, you had heads that were going for 10 years already. You know. But the
Right.
interesting thing about the 70s was that, and especially looking back at photos, is that, you know, I didn't realize this at the time, but in the 70s, you still had pretty much everybody was pretty young,
Mm-hmm.
that were going to see the Dead. Um, you had some older folks that might have been, but even if you think of
We're
the
talking
age of,
30s, and we're talking like 30, like in their 30s.
yeah,
No one was in their
yeah,
40s. Like it's like, but at the
right.
time,
No one was in their 50s or 60s or their 70s or their 80s like they are now.
yes.
That's what was interesting about the 70s or even the 60s,
And I think
you
that
know.
culture, my assessment as someone who's a millennial, because when I go to a lot of live music shows, it's a lot of Gen X and boomers actually. Like I'll go to these like there's all these cover bands locally, and it's like oh a Duran Duran or whatever 80s cover band, and the whole audience is Gen X and boomer. So I also think that it's a little bit of your guys' cultural identity. Like I think that is your culture, and like especially for Deadheads, it's like going to concerts is like a thing you do. But maybe the earlier generations, maybe they'd go to a symphony or something, or turn on the radio and listen to an opera. I just don't think they were going to rock concerts.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
that's when it started, and it just hasn't stopped.
yeah. That could be.
But people
Like,
aren't stopping. I'm saying the people who went are still going. Like the people who were 20 then are still going.
are still going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and bringing along their kids and their
Yes.
kids' kids and all that. So yeah, you see so many generations of people now, and so I guess yeah, that's what it is. Like you didn't really see that many generations of people back in the 70s. Everybody looked like my brothers,
Mm-hmm.
at that time, and I mean, I learned a lot that first day. My brothers to this day say, "Well, oh, man, if you're gonna have a first show, it might as well be that one." So they kind of I was thrown into the deep end, I think, on that day, and I like I said, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the fact that of how to act. How to just observe. I mean, I was observing. I was basically listening. I was listening to the people around me and seeing what they're doing. And everybody was very chill and very cool. 125,000 people in one place with all they had was what they had on their backs. It was a Woodstock kind of a thing, right? You have to walk in, even though probably Woodstock had more to offer in concession wise than
Mm-hmm.
certainly Englishtown, New Jersey.
So you guys didn't have
They
water. You were saying there was no bottled. It's like no conveniences. Like there was no water
no,
fountains. You guys were just
no
thirsty.
water fountains. I mean, I don't know. We drank whiskey, you know. That's
So
you
they
know.
sold alcohol though.
No, you bring that
Oh,
in.
you could just bring whatever you wanted. It was
Oh,
like
oh yeah.
okay. So you were saying they didn't
You
even check your ticket. Everyone just kind of went in,
you could bring in
picnic.
coolers.
Okay.
Yeah, back then you could bring in big coolers,
Oh, that's
any kind of
awesome.
cooler. You could bring in jugs like a plastic milk jug filled with water, a
Wow.
plastic milk jug filled with scotch,
And
whiskey.
now they have clear bag policies. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
it's like
yeah.
we're like a totally like in your bag women they're like you can only bring a purse this big and then they
Oh yeah.
sometimes like check it or it has to be clear and you're like really like okay.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of promoters learned they learned you couldn't still do that kind of thing. Like you couldn't still have the freedom to throw a show with that's so raw and unhinged as that, and liberal.
Right.
It's it was getting bound to catch up to society doing shows like that. It's just too much. It was great. It was liberating. It was fantastic. but you could see where things could get out of control.
Yeah, it just takes one bad egg, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. But interesting is like I saw a bad egg or two that day for sure. People, little maybe somebody a little too high, maybe somebody a little too malicious. And the cool thing about what I learned, and have always learned from dead shows and subsequent types of shows like that, is that the people chill out other people. It's like if somebody's being a bad actor. Um, it doesn't last long because other people aren't going to take it.
Right.
It's like their vibe is too cool to let it happen. Somebody could say something and it could chill that person down. If that person's not, I saw one person that day who was, yeah, a little bit out of control. They were just moving through the crowd. The crowd was blankets on the ground. That's what it was. You put your blanket on the ground and you try to hang with your blanket and your buds and your people, but that didn't last too long because people will get up and dance and whatnot. But you'd have your character walking through and just like walking through the middle of your stuff or bumping into somebody and or just making a clown of themselves in the middle of your crowd. And it's like, you laugh at first and they're either gonna laugh with you or they're gonna move on or something. And so yeah, so there wasn't too many people that were out of control. Um, because they knew they got a sense of who they were with, and it's like, this isn't the place to be foolish,
And
kind of thing.
then did that is that concert still one of the best concerts you've ever been to, or like how would you rank it as time? Like I know it's impactful because it was your first Dead experience, but how does it rank in terms of your overall, I guess, every concert and also of the Dead?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It was my first concert, so there was a lot to learn after that, and a lot to see after that. It was unique. Um, Music wise, it was great, but and what they played, and you go back and listen to the recordings of it in the show, and a great loser that day. The loser was amazing, and some other standouts. But I mean, it was a good show. But their big shows are usually not their best shows. I mean, they've admittedly said that things like Woodstock. Whenever they're on the big stage, they tend to not bring it like they have at other times. Like, shows when their best shows are just like they show up one night and boom, they're on. They don't even know it, and they do a great show.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to them, you can never tell what kind of a show they were going to do, and the big shows tended to be a little bit, questionable. Like you couldn't predict what was going to go on. But this was one of their first big, like one of their they did Watkins Glen. That was with the Allman Brothers in the band, but that was a three-band bill, and that was huge. And they did a great show that day. But this was one of the bigger shows they did around that time that they headlined, right? So they had Marshall Tucker come on, and they had the New Riders of the Purple Sage. So they had New Riders of the Purple Sage come on first, then Marshall Tucker came on, then the Dead came on. So they headlined. So it was a big show for them. So seeing all three of those bands was fantastic. But as far as the quality of the music was, the quality of the sound was a little shaky because of the fact that if you saw that big huge that big shot from the helicopter, they didn't perfect the sound in on shows like that until later on. It was a '70s show, so they did what they could with a big crowd like that. But so anyway, so it was like that was an atmosphere show. That was a getting to know you kind of show for me. Some of the better shows that it's hard to say for me what the best Grateful Dead show was. I mean, I saw them at Radio City Music Hall. So talk about some local concerts that I've been to, which was mostly because I was an East Coast person, a lot of up and down the East Coast. So Radio City, there was a run in Radio City in '81, all great shows, the '80 or '81. They were all great shows, and Radio City Music Hall just sounded perfect. They came out and they did an acoustic set, and they did two electric sets, and then they did a Halloween show at the end of it. Those were fantastic shows. Oh, I saw a show at the Nassau Coliseum where they would always be pretty good. They would always do very good shows at the Nassau Coliseum. But this one show, Branford Marsalis showed up, and he's a big jazz guy. This was '91, and they played Bird Song, Beautiful Eyes of the World. And so this was the first time to see them going into the spaces that they go with with a saxophone player. He was playing I think he had an alto sax that day, he had a tenor sax. Eyes of the World, I think he was playing a tenor sax, and it was beautiful. It was great, and that was really the first time that I saw them with a great, fantastic professional jazz player, you know. And I think I mentioned that to you before. Is that the way I listen to them is they're a jazz band to me. You know, I mean, that's how I see it because there's different parts, just like a symphony. You know, when you look at 80 players on a stage, oboes, your strings, you know, all these different sections, and you can hear them separately. You know, and when it's mixed well. So that was the thing in '77 when I saw them. It wasn't mixed well.
Right.
You
They didn't
know,
have a sound
it,
engineer making sure that everything is to the right
yeah, I mean
volume.
this. Right. And God knows where you know, wherever I was standing, it was, you know, you could hear from somewhere, you could hear a little from the other place. But yeah, some of the better shows have been in the better venues, you know, like Radio City, and or later on when they like in the '90s when they just perfected their sound system a little bit more, you know. You probably heard about the Wall of Sound. I never
Mhm.
saw the Wall of Sound in '74, which must have sounded fantastic. But
Well,
let's
you would
see. I
have been
mean, you know,
11, right? So you would have been way too
uh,
young.
yeah, a little bit. No, I wouldn't have. I would have gone. You know,
If
I
your
would have
brothers
attempted.
had if your brothers had been willing to take you, you would have come.
I, yeah, at that point they wouldn't have been.
Well,
No.
think of those. I watched the video of the little children, get off the fence and little children running around. And then think of the little kids that were there that didn't appreciate it. You know what I mean? Like the ones that were 5 and they're like, I was at that concert, but I don't remember anything because I was 5. Because there was also those children who went to Dead shows, but they probably don't really remember it. So maybe that's worse.
Yeah, I mean, there's some cool shots of the of Veneta, Oregon, of the kids running around on
Yeah,
the
that's
stage
what
and
I'm
stuff.
talking
But
about.
oh
Like,
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
It's like imagine like because they everyone brought their kids and they were just kind of like running around and it was like oh okay everyone's just camping out and children and then it's like I
Yeah.
was at that show but I'm sure the 5-year-olds don't they didn't at the time understand how like amazing that was then.
No, but I mean, they probably grew up to see them later, Bill Kreutzmann's son, Justin Kreutzmann. He's a filmmaker now, but and he was when he was a teenager, he was running around with a little high 8 camera in the '80s, and he's done a couple of he's worked on a couple of films for them. He did this thing called Backstage Pass, which he took some archival footage of when they went to Egypt, and the Egypt stuff was fantastic. I don't know if you knew that they
I
played at
didn't
the
know about that. See,
oh
every
they
interview I learned things that I
oh man they played at the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, in front of the Sphinx Theater.
what year?
Yeah, '78. Yeah.
Wow, back then.
Yeah,
Talk
and the
about
weird thing, yeah, they did 3 nights. You know, it's interesting to see to read a little bit about how that happened because at the time, you know, the Middle East, you know, it's like it is today. It wasn't in good shape, and they got a cultural pass of some kind. They were the only American band to ever play the pyramids at that point for sure, and I think even quite a while after that until someone else came. They started doing some other shows there, but it was pretty well documented. And Bill Kreutzmann's son put together some archival footage, and that's something called a backstage pass. It was supposed to do a small film about it, but I don't think they ever did. That's one of those shows where they admittedly they did 3 nights there, but it didn't they didn't play well, so they say. I mean, it sounds okay, but it's yeah, they didn't play well for some reason.
I
I
think
don't
in
know.
general, I know you said the radio music hall, whatever it
Radio
is. Yeah,
City,
Radio
yeah.
City. Yeah. I mean, I think in general, indoor concerts are easier. I think any outdoor concert is difficult.
Yeah, sure. Well, absolutely. But you know what's interesting about the boys is that they would always try to be experimental, and of course they want it. They're going to take that. Like you say, okay, you can play at the pyramids. Okay, how are we going to do it? Let's make it happen. One of the interesting stories about when they got there is the roadies were setting things up, and they're smoking a lot of hash, and as they always did, and they got some crazy wild ideas of how they were gonna set up the sound system. On the surface, I don't have the details of this, but basically what they wound up doing is running mics through from the stage into a tomb of a pharaoh. I'm not sure which one. Into a tomb and then back out. So they basically used it and it was a couple of 100 feet away behind the stage. Into a tomb, used it as an echo chamber, and then it came back out onto the stage. So, you know,
Huh.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Like, yeah, because they didn't have. I'm sure they didn't have all the electrical rigging necessary to amplify. They didn't have their wall of sound with them. It's
they
ancient.
did not have the wall of sound at that one, no. But they were innovators. Their sound crew was the best.
Uh huh.
That's for
It's
sure.
just
And
a
they were.
lot of stuff to ship in. I mean, they probably had to get
Oh,
everything available in the country locally. Like, hey, get us every
no, no.
speaker.
They shipped everything in. They shipped all the speakers in. They shipped all the amps. They
Sounds like a
shipped everything.
logistical nightmare.
Absolutely.
And by
This
shipping, it was
tons and
on
tons
a
and tons.
boat. I'm sure it was on a boat.
I am not sure about that. They might have shipped some on a boat, but I know
I
that they
mean,
took a lot of
planes back
planes. They
then. I mean, that's a
they
lot of heavy equipment to put
they
on
they took a
planes.
lot. They might have had a separate plane just for the equipment.
Wow.
Yeah. So they were innovators, that's for sure. So I'm trying to think of, I want to touch on this is that Jerry Garcia band shows. So I saw a lot of those,
Hmm.
I've seen, maybe about 25 of those over time. And to me, whole different experience. I'm sure you heard this a lot from a lot of people. Is that musically, he could go to places that the Grateful Dead couldn't go, right? He could do things that were a little bit more free form, um, you know, open open spaces to go to. Obviously he had just said a four-piece band with him, um, and it was all coming out of his head, whatever he wanted to do. And the tunes were different. Obviously he's got a couple of Jerry Garcia band albums out. But he would play a lot of blues tunes. He would play a lot of traditional tunes and whatnot. I saw a reaction of you reacting to Eleanor Rigby.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
it's
he
the
did
after midnight teasing Eleanor
after
Rigby
midnight.
back to midnight. And I guess what? Right before I started this interview, I recorded a video of Jerry Garcia band Dear Prudence cover.
Yeah, yeah,
So I did that today. That will come out like in a few days. But
yeah, he
someone
covered
had,
that.
I had to. Someone had mentioned it a few months ago, and I said, "Well, I have to first re-listen to the Beatles' Dear Prudence because I skipped over that one as a kid. Like I had the White Album, and I'd be like, oh, the ones I liked. Oh, Blah Dee. It's such a kid song, and I literally skipped Dear Prudence as a kid. So I had to first do my
Uh,
Beatles reaction, and then I was like, now I can do the Jerry Garcia band cover. You can't really listen to a cover before you hear the original.
yeah, well, that's true. That's true. I mean, you can hear it, but you should go back. Yeah,
Or you don't know
and
what they're
and
basing it on. You're like, what is this?
yeah,
You have to know what they're
and the beautiful,
interpolating.
and that's why what the beautiful thing about something like Eleanor Rigby is, you know the song, and he didn't sing any of the words. He played note for note, and even elaborated and embellished the notes in between.
Yeah, it's a
It shows you the
variation. It's a
Oh
variation.
my
Yeah.
God, it just shows you the brilliance of what is coming out of his head, what he's thinking when he's playing. And the way how unique he is when he plays and how he thinks. You know,
Right.
I mean that's why the people who play with him, the Dead stuck together as a band, I think, because I don't know if the separate players could play with other bands and really make anything work. I think they enjoyed being with each other because they knew how each other talked. They knew the language of each other. I know that Jerry would always say, well, it's gonna be a good night if Phil's having a good night, you
Hmm.
know, and vice versa. The way that Bob played rhythm guitar, he is unique to a band in general. He's known pretty much in the circles of music, um, uh, rock and roll music over the decades as being one of the most unique rhythm guitarists ever because he played with Jerry and he had to kind of get into the spaces that Jerry wouldn't be in, and you could hear him. And when you hear a good mix, you can hear Bob, and it's like if you take everything else away, do that sometime. Check out Bob Weir. Check out Bob Weir isolated
Okay.
guitar for
Well,
a live show, and you're going to say to yourself,
yeah.
"What is?
Yeah.
How could this
Yeah.
make any sense?"
Well,
And
I
it
already
does.
noticed a little bit that I'd be like, okay, whenever there's a singing line, the line will stop, and then you'll hear, I think it's the rhythm guitar mainly going there, usually, and it's kind of like a call and response, but it's almost like it's perfectly classically kind of designed. Because usually in like a call, there's like a form in music where it's like there's a question and an answer, and I've noticed that that will either answer that or it's like a nice it works with Jerry in like a very unique way. I know what you're saying. Like I've already
Yeah.
been like that's why it was really complex at first because I didn't realize they were going to have so many people in the band. See, like I started with Fish. Fish only has four people. So I can
Hmm.
hear, and it's jazz, it's very jazz influenced Fish. So I'm like, okay, I can hear every single person individually at once, and it's not overwhelming for me. This was then another level because I'm like, wait a minute, there's multiple guitars, sometimes there's multiple drums, sometimes there's multiple this, there's a synthesizer. I don't know what's going on. Like it was like too
Hmm.
much at once that I was like, this is almost cacophonous. So it took me a while, and that's why now going back to the simpler stuff, like the folky stuff, Americana, and I'm getting like, okay, it's like because I listened to Dark Star before I listened to their Americana, so then I'm like, this is insane. So now I'm like, okay, there's a lot of accessible things. It's all you need to have it all though. I feel like I need to
Yeah.
have all of the eras to kind of really understand. And I'm building. I'm
Yeah.
building slowly and it's working. A tapestry is coming together for me.
Right. I mean, when they were the Warlocks, they were doing rock and roll, basically. They're just 60s rock. They weren't even as psychedelic as they became with the early 65, 66, 67 Dead. And they were playing in little bars, when they were the Warlocks. They were playing in topless bars. That's basically strip bars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and uh, and so they were loud and they were just rocking and getting to know what they could do with each other, but but then they started dropping acid, and it's like that boom between the music, between the musical ability coming out of them that they didn't know they had, and then the psychedelics in their head, and being able to read each other on stage. They went into places, they went into different places that other bands even in the 60s, wouldn't go. Quicksilver maybe did, the Airplane. But, now we're getting into the sort of morphing into the conversation about jam bands because they really, obviously they're the original jam band in some way, which leads you up to Fish and leads you up to all these other jam bands that exist today, which is a fantastic, amazing, large community. Who would have thought, that
Yeah.
we could get here? This is just, it's outrageous. It's great. And so much to see. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems to me like, and in a world that so many things seem to be mainstream, and capitalism is king and all that. Still, the jam bands, they have a niche for themselves to be in a world, to live in a world, in this country specifically, where they don't, they have a built-in world. They're not trying to sell themselves on a stage that to Pepsi, or doing commercials, or other acts these days. They kind of, your Harry Styles, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. I mean, they go
Yes.
into a corporate world that the jam bands don't need to go into, which I
But I
think is
have a
great.
theory on that. I mean, my theory would be that the jam bands have such a strong fan following. You could almost call it a cult following. Like, obviously, like, Fish is a cult following. Like, whether they're, like,
Mm.
religious about it or not, like, you could be just, like, a casual Fish cult member, or you could be a dogmatic Fish cult member. But the fact is that Fish can basically say, we're doing a spring tour, we're doing a summer tour. They can then have people who are literally following them around the country to every single show, and people will show up no matter what. So then they go, okay, we have freedom now. We can design 2 independent sets for each show. We have a light person. Every show is unique. We never have to repeat a single thing for the whole tour. And every other band is always pressured to sell albums. So the business model is completely different. Phish is like, we're making money at shows. As long as our fans are following us, we can sell, we're going to make money from shows. You have these record companies who sign these artists, like Harry Styles or any mainstream band, right? And they're like, you must release this many albums in this many year. Then you must promote the album. So when they go on tour, they're playing the new album. No one wants to hear that. Like every time Madonna had a new album, everyone just wanted to hear her old stuff. But I think she was pressured to sell albums. So it's like the whole model is completely different. And people paid all this money for Taylor Swift and Beyonce. But at the end of the day, they're still promoting. Well, Taylor Swift had eras, right? So it's like she got to do it. She has enough freedom to do whatever she wants. And Beyonce, though, I think still was like Cowboy Carter, right? She's like promoting her newest album. Maybe she'll do a few old things throughout the show. But it's just a different... She doesn't have the freedom that Phish has, or whatever. Dead and Company now can probably do anything.
Right.
And people will
That's
come.
true.
They can sell at the Sphere every night they want to announce it.
Yeah. Oh.
And then Goose. Probably. I went to the Goose concert, so I was like, this is an interesting community. I was like,
so I'll be a Goose in 2 days.
Oh, you are
Saturday.
They're going to MSG, right? Yeah.
MSG, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the first time they're playing the big house.
They're getting kind of big. Have you seen them before?
I have not. No.
Okay, so I now that I've seen Phish, and I've seen Goose, I was like, oh, okay, they're different, very different. Very different. But I'd say, but the fan base I saw in San Francisco, because it was both San Francisco shows, the Goose fans looked more like Deadheads to me, like original Deadheads. And Phish fans seemed to be, they were originally Phish fans. Some Deadheads crossover. Like some people cross over, but the audience was older at Goose than at Phish, even though Goose is a younger band.
That's interesting. Yeah. A lot of that must come from how they originated themselves. I know they're from Connecticut, actually.
They are. I heard they played as, I think it's because there was some, I don't know if it was one of the Mexico, if Dead and Company did some kind of one of those Mexico Riviera Maya things, or someone was mentioning that they opened at one point in a festival, that there was some other band there, and that's when everyone clung on to them, and it was a direct Deadhead thing, because the average Phish person, in my opinion, is an East Coast man between the ages of 47 and 55. He's kind of a dad. Like, that's kind of, to me, like, the typical Phish fan is, like, an East Coast man between this age and this age, Gen X. And then I think the Deadheads have a little wider range, and you see younger people, second generation, the kids of the originals, and you see more people. But I think in New York, you're going to see more millennial Goose fans, because I'm in the Goose groups, like, on Facebook, and they seem to be a lot of, like, Goose chicks are a lot of millennial girls. So, like, I think they'll actually be... If they're playing MSG, it's going to be big. So you're going to see big, everybody. Obviously.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I think I see that. I've been seeing younger people going to Phish shows for the last 10 years. But people fall in and out of Phish. They've been around for so long. So like I don't go to see Phish as much as I used to at all. But I think musically, I'm not sure if you were saying this before about musically, like Phish and Goose are very different. Did you mean musically, or did you mean by? Oh, really?
Yeah.
I see it as when I get into it, when I enjoy a band like Phish, which you would call a jam band. Obviously, you call it a jam band. Their songs to me are a vehicle to get to the jam.
They're jam vehicles, yes.
Exactly, right. And so, the song structure, you've got some lyrics, and then you get into what the meat and potatoes of what, to me, and with four guys, they can sound like an orchestra. I mean, I was at an MSG show one time, and I thought the stage was lifting off the ground. It was just amazing, and they're really powerful, and they're really great at what they do as far as jamming into spaces and working with each other and that kind of thing. I see that Goose, Goose is a 4-piece too, and so I see a very similar kind of thing when they get jamming. So I don't pay much attention to their songs. as a structured song.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see them get to the jam. And the
Mm-hmm.
same with Fish, same
Mm-hmm.
with there's the same thing with Mo.
Mm.
Like there's a band Mo, there's a,
Yes, that I would
the
call that I cutely called Mo Dot apparently, and people really thought that was cute. I go, there's this band. It's called
Mo.com.
Mo
Yeah.
Dot. It has
Mo.
a
Yeah.
dot right after it, so I was like, they're called
Yeah.
Mo Dot, and everyone was like, oh, that's so cute. I was like, well, it has a dot. They're like, it's silent. I'm like, how am I supposed to know that? It's like their band
Yeah.
is Mo Dot, so I was like, Mo Dot, like
Yeah.
I heard they're
So
good. Yeah, I listened to one
they
song by
are.
them.
They are, but they to me maybe they tend to sing too much.
Mm.
I want to see.
They're
I want to
not
see.
they're not a jam band enough. They're too much of doing songs.
They
They're
might,
singing.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
a little bit. I'm not. I don't know of many jam bands that I like really want to hear their songs for what the songs are.
Right.
Not that I don't like what
Well,
I think
people
that
would argue
that's
that Goose has very commercial songs that would just play on the radio that could be popular, and I think that's where there's like
oh
now two Goose camps. There's like people who are like, "Oh wow, these are like good-looking rock stars that have like catchy songs, really mainstream." Honestly, if you played it without a jam in the middle, you would just be like, "Oh, that's like a rock song they play on the radio." Then separately, they do elaborate on it as a jam vehicle. So I'd say that's the difference. Where
mm,
it's like Fish Foam, I love that song. It's weird AF. Like I
mm,
think it's like so weird and chromatic, and I'm like, oh, it's so like music school. But it then just becomes a jam. but like, but you're not gonna play Foam on the radio. No one could access it. No one like the mainstream
yeah,
would be like. That's why people think Fish is so weird because they're singing like their Gamehenge songs and like lizards and like it doesn't
right.
work on the radio. Whereas I think a Goose song, they have like Arcadia. They have this Iguana song is actually really it sounds honestly just like a SoCal rock band. Like it sounds like it could play on any radio station or in a TV show, honestly. Then they took it and they jammed. So that's what I'd say
Yeah.
the difference is.
Yeah, and that's what I like, and I mean that's what that's what I like about the Grateful Dead. Although I like their songs, I think they're better at structuring songs. Their songs mean more to me.
Yes.
I can follow their songs, that kind of thing. However, their songs too are a vehicle to a jam. So, for instance, a song like Scarlet Begonias goes into Fire on the Mountain. You that's can stretch out to 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Meanwhile, Scarlet Begonias is really just a 5 minute song, and so is Fire on the Mountain. So, it's fantastic to see what they can do and how they can stretch it out from what they've created on paper. And I heard you talking about Hunter the other day, Robert Hunter,
Mm-hmm.
and that he, and I know you're a songwriter as well, and I think it always helps to listen to different styles, the way that people write, the lyrics. To me, though, I wanted to mention this because I know that you talk about this with some folks. Is that to me I think that when you hear a song, especially a Grateful Dead song, or the lyrics might be pretty heavy, I think that each person interprets them so differently. So I've never been one to get in a conversation with anyone about, oh, what does that mean? Or I think that's why Robert Hunter doesn't talk about the songs that he writes. He doesn't. If they have a meaning to him, then that's cool. But once they're out there, you can take it, Erica, and put to it what you want it as it want it to mean, and the
Well,
way
that's
you
how it should
interpret it.
be. That's how
Yeah,
poetry was intended. I mean,
right,
poetry is supposed to be self interpreted and not necessarily. So, yes, it's funny when people go into
right.
forums and they start being like, what does it mean? And then they start
Yeah,
arguing, like, no, it actually means this. And no, there's actually a hidden deep. It's like, yes and no. It's like, I think I think music is very personal. It's whatever it's about your experience, what that song makes you feel, what emotions it brings up for you. And I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think where people get strange is when they get mad if you don't agree with them. Like if I react to something and I go, it's not my favorite, and someone's like, but that's my favorite song. They actually get really upset. And I'm like, you guys, it's okay that we don't like everything the same. That's what makes world beautiful. It's like we
yeah,
can have things we like, but you might like it more. And there's something that I may just not like and never listen to again. That doesn't mean we can't be friends. It doesn't mean that I don't
mm,
like you as a person. So it's just
yeah,
interesting that a lot of people they get so triggered by that, but yet the reactor space on YouTube is so big. Like it's like so people obviously like watching them, but it's
yeah. Isn't
interesting
that
that
interesting?
yeah, it's interesting, and then people get
Wow.
upset. What happened?
I,
I know you had questions about that because you were like, I have some questions for you about your
oh
fandom.
yeah, since you hit on that, I think so. The the react. Oh, but I just want to go back to one thing about jam bands. That
Yes.
there are some bands, jam bands like Sound Tribe Sector 9. I don't know if you've heard of them. Lotus. These are there's a band that used to be around called Particle. I loved them. They would take techno and they would
Mm.
move techno into the space with jam bands
Ooh.
and yeah, oh, it's beautiful stuff. And
Okay.
there's plenty of it around,
Oh, I want to
you
listen
know.
to that because I like
And
EDM. So.
oh, absolutely, you'd love this stuff. And it's complicated and there's not a lot of lyrics, and I love that. You know, I like to listen to a lot of ambient music,
Mm.
and you know maybe electronic ambient music to really get into to a little bit more interesting. Um, so anyway, I just wanted to mention that yeah, it's not always about the lyrics to me at all. It's about the feeling, it's about the groove, and maybe it's fast groove, maybe it's just a small kind of medium groove, but I think that's what most people want to hear when they're going to see a jam band, that kind of thing. But you mentioned, yeah, I so the reaction world on YouTube is huge, and I think I don't know how long it's been like that. What, at least a couple of years, or I don't know when people started reacting to things on YouTube. But I think maybe it's that I do have a question after this. It's like, is it validation? It's like somebody says, "Oh, I love this band for so long, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing someone else that loves this band," and they're younger, let's say, and a whole different generation who's appreciating something, so I is there anyone on YouTube who's doing the opposite? An older generational person who's trying to listen to younger, who's trying to listen to music of today, contemporary music of today, and reacting to it. I have not searched that out. I do not
Huh.
know if it exists.
It probably
Um,
does because I've seen some older creators like people in their 80s doing like they'll have shows where they like teach people about cooking or like there's this old guy that like shows World War II recipes his mom used to make in England and he has like millions of followers on TikTok. So I do think there's older people who are doing videos. I just don't know if it would be pleasant for people to see someone who always hates something. Like I don't know
that's
if
it.
people want to see someone reacting and then being like, I absolutely hate it. Like, so I try to be balanced. I think that's why people are starting to warm up to me, or now I have a mini little following now. But I think at first there's a lot of reactors who just always act like they're surprised, and then by the end they're like, I really like that. That's interesting, right? And they always have the same kind of canned response by the end. And I'm trying to be really honest about it. Like, that's not my favorite. It's okay, and I try to rate it on like a scale because it's like I'm not everything has to be amazing. Like not
I
everything
like
is amazing.
Yeah, I like what you're doing as far as zeroing in on a community of jam bands, and jam bands that have morphed from the Grateful Dead experience.
Yeah.
I want to throw this. Pink Floyd in the early days, they were a jam vehicle. If you ever get a chance to really listen to some experiment, because they're an experimental art band,
Mm-hmm.
back in the mid '60s and the late '60s, and they would just go and play at this little club or something and plug in and just go crazy. And so they were a jam band.
Hmm.
I don't think a lot of
I
people,
didn't know that.
yeah, I mean, that's it's not the label they have
But I've also
as
never
a,
heard their whole albums either. So like I feel like if I do
yeah.
that, I'm gonna have to listen to their most famous album
I mean,
and
their
then
most popular, famous albums would not indicate jam bands at all.
no.
Would not indicate a jam vehicle. But their earlier stuff, like Interstellar Overdrive, things like that, in the metal album. This is stuff that's pre 1970. If you get a chance to go listen to that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see a 13-minute song. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
see long songs that
Interesting.
just go on, and they should be, and I think they do in some spaces, is get credit for being one of the original jam bands, just like the Grateful Dead, for
Okay.
sure.
So
It's just
so maybe the Grateful Dead wasn't the first jam band, but they're
no,
the one
I
that
would
made it the
say
most popular.
Well, back in the psychedelic '60s, when the Dead were doing it and creating, and establishing that genre, the Floyd were doing it at the same time. The thing was is that the Dead continued to do it over time, and the Floyd kind of they changed their style a little bit. They went into creating things like Dark Side of the Moon,
Hmm.
and they're much more song structure for sure.
Right.
And
Well, that's what I
Dark,
like about the Beatles albums. Like I was
yeah.
saying, as I was reviewing the Beatles albums, I'm like, this is a different. You cannot compare the beauty of a Beatles album, which was meant to be played as a record, that was meant to be studio created, and it's art. It is like, this is art in its form. It's like a painter, they make their final stroke, and they go, this is the White Album. This is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. You can't compare that to going to a concert where they take these songs as jam vehicles, then go into a whole new elaboration. It's really more like jazz improv, right? It's
Mhm.
nothing to do with a recorded. And I think that's where
Mhm.
there's no point in comparing them directly. I really think it's two separate things. There's
Mhm.
studio work, like things that are recorded for the studio to be recordings that exist in time as art. This is a piece, wrap it up with a bow. This is the art versus a living art, right? So
Yeah,
in a way, when you're doing live performances, it is a living art. And I would
yeah.
argue that because I come from an opera background in musical theater, I would argue that all live music, whether it's jam, purposeful, let's improv something we never did before, all live performances vary slightly from each other. And there is a
Mhm.
beauty and art in that. There's a beauty in that sometimes the high note's going to be a little bit different than the soprano sang it the night before. The conductor might do a
Mhm.
slightly different tempo than he did the night before because he might be nervous or he had like an indigestion, and then the tempo goes like crazy in the opera or the symphony, right? So I think live music is a living creature that is
Yeah.
developing as it goes, and it's beautiful in what it is, but I still think you can say I prefer, like someone could say, oh, I prefer the beauty of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album start to finish. Bam. Like
Yeah.
that is a piece of art, but you can't compare them because one is living and one is set. But I also
Yeah.
think every time you listen to an old album, and what I'm doing with reacting, I'm creating a live experience of something already done, which is
Mm.
then creating a new perspective on something that's already been dead, if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, you go deeper into these things, and that's what the more you talk about these things, the deeper you can go, and things you can pull out of them. I think that some of the to get back to what you were saying, some of the best musical artists and bands, what they do is they realize that there's going to be warts and all. When you go on a live stage, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to sing things differently and you're maybe not going to sing that. And the Bob and Jerry, especially Bob, they would always miss lines. And the community would laugh about it. It's like, oh, Bob fucked up trucking again.
Well,
That's and
nowadays they have iPads on stage.
yeah, they do.
Nowadays they have lyrics and they have monitors and they can have.
They do.
But back
But
then it was like,
God willing, they're still gonna be flexible. And if you miss something, you miss something, and that's it, and you move on. That kind of thing. So it's yeah, that's the
I
best.
think at one of the Fish concerts in the spring this year, Mike forgot the words to Mike's song.
Mm.
So that was the joke of one of the openings. It was like Portland or something. They're like, oh, Mike forgot the words to Mike's song. Okay. Like,
Yeah, well,
it happens. It's a lot of stuff to memorize, and they're
it's
60
funny.
now.
Yeah, it sure is. It's funny, actually. I think that there's another to what you were just saying is that you had asked me a while back. When I was younger, what kind of bands, what was I seeing? And I was, if you look at some of the older bands back in the '70s, you got Led Zeppelin, and I was into Yes. I was into Pink Floyd, of course, and these are bands that they could put an album out. Yet, yes, albums are very complicated and structured and musically structured, really intense and orchestrated. And I would get into the albums as a kid, and then all of a sudden I'd have a chance to go see them, and it was just amazing that they could actually take what they were doing on a record and perform it live. And that's just because it's complicated stuff, you know, and so they could perform it fantastically. But they weren't a jam band vehicle because of the fact that it was kind of structured, but they could do it so beautifully, you know, and replicate what they had on their album. A lot of people loved that kind of thing. So when I would go see a show like that, or let's say when I was in high school, people would like those kind of bands and they'd go, "Oh my God, these guys are so great live." And I'm like, "Yeah, they are great live." But there's this other thing called the Grateful Dead, and what they do is a little bit different. When I was in high school, those were my years of trying to push the Grateful Dead on people. You know, I've learned not to push. Probably through that, I've learned not to push things on people. But you know, I would preach that. I would preach the Dead. I would preach who they are and what they do. And because there was only a handful of people that I knew in my school who were my friends that even knew about them. I think I might have been the only one that had seen them live by '77. And so that was you know, so that was it just I didn't even try. It just like was motivated out of me to just like try to preach, tell people about them. I gave that up after a couple of years, but you know,
It's a lost cause sometimes.
yeah, it was yeah, certainly it didn't matter anymore. You know, it was like, oh, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna enjoy it. You know, and that's certainly what I did. You know, there's another thing I just want to touch on the fact that they were so different. There was such a different band growing in what they did in the '60s, the '70s. You've probably heard this from other people you've interviewed. '60s, the '70s, the '80s, and the '90s. You know, they were so different through all those eras that that they always kept you thinking. They always kept you on your toes, and they always kept you entertained. Um, you know, but they were and they're again catalog. They would always play the same. You know, they play the same stuff. So in Eyes of the World in '92 was not like it was in '72 or in '82 or in late '70s. Um, but that's where they were, you know, and they physically got, especially Jerry, they physically got older. Believe it or not, we're talking about '92, and that's what I think is interesting about today's music too, is about today's jam bands, is that the Dead could do what they did in '70s. They were really vibrant. If you listen to what they do, man, the energy just amazing. In the '80s, it was a little different because they were getting a little older. You know, a lot of weariness, a lot of drugs, and a lot of a lot of traveling, a lot of just getting older. And then in the '90s, getting older too. So you said you're going to see Dead and Company. You know, Mickey and Bob, they're old. You know, they're hanging in there,
Yeah.
but they're old, but what they've done is they're taking on, and they did this ever since Jerry died, taking on the young guys. You know, the young guys on the keyboard, the young guys on the bass, the young guy on the guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how a lot of bands, I think, if they're smart, they can keep that going in their band.
That's what Willie Nelson did, because I just saw Willie Nelson, and it was with Billy Strings and Bob Dylan in the same headliner. It was three concerts in one. And he had Willie Nelson sang and everything, but he had I think one of them's his son, and then there's like two other guys playing guitar with him, and then he had a harmonica guy, and he would sing, but he would never play and sing at the same time. So he would play, and then he would like take a break, and then other people would sing the harmony, and then he would not play while he sang, but it was really, and they sat down. So they had all the guitarists sitting down, instead of, a lot of times guitarists are standing, right? So I think he did what he could do because he's in his 80s.
Yeah.
So but it was great. The music still came across really great, and it was smart. It's like, make your own band, play the songs you want to play, do what you can, but everyone still really loved it. So it wasn't like, oh, he's old. It's like, and Bob Dylan was really old. I mean, Bob Dylan, I didn't know he was that old.
Bob's hanging in there.
Yeah, I was like, Mom, I have to go to see, I basically flew down for one night because Billy Strings was at the Hollywood Bowl. So I was like, I have to see Billy Strings. That was like the first reaction I did that made me viral, actually, was my Billy Strings reaction. And I fly down, I had to see Billy Strings, and then it was also Bob Dylan, and my mom is a, boomer, so she's like, she wanted to see, I was like, let's all go to this triple headliner. And anyway, but Bob Dylan, he hangs in there. He didn't want monitors on. He's very different. He has like minimalist stage, minimalist lighting.
He's mostly playing piano.
He is.
Now. Yeah.
I think that's all he can do. I think my mom's like, I didn't even know he played piano. I'm like, well, he's got to do something. I don't think he wants to play guitar anymore.
He's a great example of somebody who's always always hired people to play with ever since he was, with the band back, and Robbie Robertson and all those people. And he's hired younger people. Everybody's always younger than Bob,
Yeah.
basically because he's old, and he still does it. Yeah, and it shows. I mean, obviously Billy Strings isn't in Bob Dylan's band, but if Bob hangs in another 5 years, Billy might be. Who knows? But it's really cool how he's always picked up on. I saw Bob Dylan in Paris once, and it was a fantastic experience, and he had a lot of. And I noticed at that time, that was 2000, he had a really young band with him, like a really young band. That one of the moments that I noticed.
It's
like,
smart. So I think
yeah.
for Dead and Company, it makes sense because they're getting older. Like, how many more years do they have original members? And then I wonder what's going to happen when all the original members have passed or retired. I wonder, will Dead and Company continue as like a cover band?
Well,
You know what I mean?
well, I hope not.
Yeah. So you think it's just
Personally,
gonna?
yeah. I mean, after Jerry died, there was a few iterations of you had the Dad, and you had the other ones, and you had all these different bands that were associated with the original members, and now they're Dead and Company and have been for a long time. Mayer, I believe, owns the rights to the name, which I think is interesting. I don't know if you knew that.
I
So,
didn't.
yeah. There's a lot of people who aren't too thrilled about that.
Well, I never liked
Um,
him. I mean, when he was a solo artist, and he was kind of known as kind of not very nice to his ex girlfriends and stuff like that. So I was never a fan of John Mayer. So then I was like, that was actually one of the reasons I had no interest in seeing them at the Sphere ever. I was like, why would I want it? One, I'd never heard a Grateful Dead song. Two, I hate John Mayer. So again, this is like a big step for me. The
Glad
fact
to hear
that
you say that, Erica. Thank you.
yeah.
No, this isn't a bash Mayor.
No, I mean, look, he's coming into a heart. Who can step into Jerry Garcia's shoes? I mean, you can't.
Yeah,
So you basically have to come in.
technically he did.
Yeah.
He technically, he's a really structured musician. He's talented, and he picked up Jerry's style. But to me, I don't think Jerry's style is one thing that you can have, but you got to have the Jerry feeling along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see enough of the Jerry feeling as I do in other people who play Jerry Garcia. I mean, John Kedlachak is a guitarist who used to play with for Dark Star Orchestra. He's on his own now. There's players that I think definitely sound more like Jerry. And I don't think anyone should. I've always thought of this when it comes to a cover band or after Jerry passed away. It's like you're not going to replace Jerry, but But there's so many guitarists out there who grew up with his music, love Jerry's style, and they picked up on it and they play it and they play the songs, or they go into jam bands like Trey, and they do what and they vary they create their own style of it. They vary it up, and that's where they come out. I think that I think that to me, marriage. I don't hear that enough in Dead and Company. So they don't have the energy that I was used to seeing the Dead over in the '90s and the '80s and the '70s. So I like it. God bless them. Let them do what they're doing, and a lot of people love them. But everything's subjective, and people love things for different reasons.
I have a question. This is okay. So this came up in my interview yesterday. So when Jerry Garcia's health started deteriorating, and then was there a period where you could, while you were following them, that you were unbiased enough to be like, this band is starting to get less tight? Did it ever seem becoming disarrayed? Like, did you ever get a sense like this isn't the same band from the 70s? Like, do you have any stories about that? Like, where there was like Jerry's health or just the cohesion of the band seemed to be fading into the 90s?
Yeah, well, the '70s were all great. The '70s, there weren't too many blemishes on Jerry or the band in the '70s. Even the early '80s, I think it was mid '80s, late '80s, and into the '90s is when people started to see a lot of changes, a lot of changes here and there, but they were random changes. They weren't always they weren't too constant. You could see a crappy show, but then the next night Jerry's on it, completely fantastic show. So it was really, and that's the story of them. I think is like every time they hit the stage, it's always how they're feeling and what's happening with them. But Jerry was always the catalyst of where things were going to go for the most part because he was addicted, and he had his troubles, and he was either going to feel good or he wasn't. But even when he didn't feel good, it seemed to me he could pull off a good show. He could go up on the stage sick at times and pull off a good show, or you could see that he's having trouble. Happened a lot more in the '90s, and there was a lot more concern, obviously, and throughout the '90s, more often that people, the band's crew and the band members, and of course the audience could see, something's wrong, right? I remember a show in the maybe 87, 88 or something like that, and at the Garden, and you know, the lights, they were keeping the lights dim, but at one point, for the most part, they would keep the lights dim, I suppose. But colored lights, they look good. But at one point, there was some bright lights, and my brother and I looked at each other and we said, "Man, he looks gray." Like he literally looked ashen gray.
Like
He
his
was
skin,
playing
not just his hair.
his
You're
skin.
saying he
Oh,
looked like
yeah.
he was no color in him.
He looked like he was ready for the end. Yeah, but he still sounded good. I remember the last two songs of that show sounded fantastic. But he had his moments. And yeah, he didn't look good at that point.
What was
and
it? Oh.
Yeah, to answer your question, in my opinion, it happened over a pretty long period of time. It wasn't just the '90s. He would have his moments, even in the '80s, but it would be from show to show.
Mm-hmm.
He
Okay.
would always show up and he would always play, and whether or not it was great or not would be. I remember coming out of some shows and I would think, oh man, it wasn't so great. I'm ready to go to get a beer at a bar, and there would be people hopping out going, wow, that was fantastic. That was the greatest show I've ever seen. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay.
You know?
So some people
Yeah.
don't know. Okay, here's a question I thought of. So when Jerry Garcia died, what was that like hearing that news? And did that, because then did you think, oh, I'm never going to hear the Dead again? Like was it like a sense of mourning or a sense of like an addiction that you could never fulfill? Or like what impact did that have on you or the world at the time?
Well, me and the world are different, right?
Yeah.
So the way it had on me is going to be different than the world, right? Because, but I would say that in '95, I remember I was at work. I was working at HBO in the middle of Manhattan, and it was relative. It was almost noon, maybe something like that, and I heard the news, and I was shocked at first, and a couple other people heard it, and a couple of people at work all took it differently, But I was a pretty severe deadhead, so I didn't take it too well. And I remember I had to walk away. I think I went outside and walked around for a little while, and but it sunk in after a little while that day because of the fact that he had been sick in the '80s too. He was sick in '89 with a coma, and he almost checked out at that time. So it's not like we weren't used to in the Grateful Dead community of hearing about Jerry's illnesses and that he was he was pushing it all the time. But I mean it was heartbreaking. It was people, it was similar to when John Lennon died.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, and maybe not, certainly not, that vast in the general population. But surprisingly, in '95, a lot of people who were not Deadheads who knew who he was. It's like, oh, he's the leader of the Grateful Dead, kind of thing. Wow, that's pretty severe. Wow, but it hit. It was hard, and as far as it took a little while to process, but as far as thinking about whether or not what was going to happen to the band at that time, it was about, well, for me, I wasn't thinking about that at all. Only a couple of days after that, Bob Weir did a show. He was up in Vermont. He was doing his own. He had his own band playing. The Dead were not on tour, and he had, of course, they were always touring separately. and he had a show coming up in New Hampshire or Vermont. It was like 2 days after that, or no, maybe the night after. And Bob got up on stage and he played. He did his show, and so that was an indication that shit. This isn't these people are not. They're musicians. It's what they do for a living. It's a big hit to lose this guy. I think that I at the time didn't think that much, but I would have. If anybody would have asked me, do you think they're going to get a new band member to replace Jerry? I would have said no. No, I don't think no, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. Um, so but we knew that Jerry wasn't gonna rise from the dead, and we knew that they weren't going to replace him. But I think that we also knew that they were going to take some time, regroup, and figure it out. And I think that's what they did. And I think that was a key year. That was a key metamorphosis, morphing into what the jam band world really became. Because in '95, yeah, you had Fish. They were young.
Yeah, early Fish,
But
yeah.
yeah, you had early Fish, and they were young, and you didn't have really anything called the jam band at that time. But you had. I want to bring up this. I want to shout out to the old Wetlands. Wetlands was a rock and roll club down in downtown Manhattan, in the Soho district, and it was opened by Peter Shapiro, and previously to him, the other guy, I forget his name, and and he it was about Grateful Dead music and everything associated with that. They opened in the late '80s, and it was also about it was called Wetlands Preserve because it was about ecology. It was about uh, the rainforests. It was about saving the rainforests. It was about sustainable planet, that kind of thing. So I'm not getting it right in my head, but that's what it was. They opened it was a eco-conscious rock club, and they would have Dead cover bands all the time. They had to close in 2001. They actually closed a couple of days after the, the bombing of the World Trade Center, and but they were planning on closing anyway. But they had this one rock and roll club in this country that geared itself towards Grateful Dead cover bands, towards jam what we were to see the jam bands to be. Fish did play there. This guy Peter Shapiro, he's the guy that runs all the Brooklyn Bowls now. The one in Vegas, and he's got Brooklyn Bowls all over the place. He started out owning Wetlands Preserve, and so he everything was born from that place. So much was born from that place, and including Fish and Dead cover bands, tons of Dead cover bands, and so he carried that on to Brooklyn Bowl, and he's actually the one who promoted and produced the 50th anniversary, which was in Chicago, of the Grateful Dead, and so when '95 hit, um, it was like, okay, well, now we know we're gonna continue with this, and it's gonna get bigger, and it did. It got bigger. People started to go to see smaller bands and smaller venues that were connected in some way to what the Grateful Dead started. And there were there was tons of bands. I mean, obviously, it's like I said, Fish existed at that time. Deep Banana Blackout, bands that are still around today. Who even Mo was around back then. So it's lasted for so long. But I think that when Jerry died, everybody realized, man, maybe this even has more meaning right now. Maybe this has a purpose that we're going to carry on, and we're going to create this space, and not even knowing it, but they created that space, and here we are today.
Right.
It's huge.
Well, he left a big legacy. I mean, right? So it's like any of these big musicians like John Lennon, right, died so young, but he left such a big musical legacy by the time he died. Mozart died at 35 years old. Mozart left a huge musical legacy. So I think as much as it's like, oh no, he left us too soon, it's like some of these people, they were meant for greatness. They were like prodigies, like young savants. So it's like with Jerry Garcia, he did so much by the time he died that he lived the life other people would take them 10 lifetimes. for what he did.
Yeah.
So that's the other way to look at it. It's like,
Yeah.
you could see it as like, because even Mozart, I always think about that. I'm like, he did all that before 35? Like, are you kidding me? Like he wrote his first opera at 7 and his first, like, symphony.
Yeah.
It's like, what? So it's like, it's just, these are
Yeah.
not normal people. These are very
No.
special people who live among us. Like Trey is one of those people. He's just like, he's brilliant. Like when you hear him talk, you're like, okay, he's definitely probably on some spectrum, but it's a brilliant spectrum. Like whatever that is, like I'm glad these people exist because they live in a different realm. It's
Yeah,
like,
they're really focused. And look at Trey and Fish are even they're a legacy now compared to something like Goose.
yeah,
They're younger and they're coming up, and there's I think there's more and more jam bands coming up every day.
right.
And I don't know that they're being influenced somewhere, and I guess they're all being influenced from these spaces that we're talking about right now,
Hmm.
which is these people and
Right.
these bands and whatnot. And I think that it's not gonna stop. It's
No.
only gonna
Yeah.
it's only
Yeah.
gonna get
It's
bigger.
only get bigger. And also, the more that you have in your musical repertoire, the better you can create your new things. Like, I think it's always good. People can listen to Dead, they can listen to The Fish, they can listen to classical music and everything from the past that comes before us. The more that we go forward, you have more back behind you to listen to. So I think it just makes them more, a bigger palette. It's like a painter's easel, right? They have a certain amount of colors and a palette, right? And then like they have more palette so they can do more things. So I always see it as like a plus to bring in the historical context, and it just means that they can continue. It's like all one. Everything's all one, really. So it's like, rather than thinking of it as like
Yeah.
Jerry dying as like the end of something, it's more that he's part of a bigger movement.
Yeah,
It's a way to see it.
and I think that today it's the recognition is out there in the music industry. Even though you've got your Taylor Swifts and you've got your big wigs that are bringing in a lot of money, big concerts, very corporate. Taylor Swift is somebody who, she's making a ton of money, good for her,
Hmm.
but she's aware of great musicians, and I think she's been on a stage with Billy Strings, and if she hasn't been, then she certainly would hop on a stage with Billy Strings. I know
Hmm.
that, and it would sound fantastic. And so there's crossover.
Hmm.
I think there's crossover to be had, which I
Right.
think is kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many genres now too, and now with like independent artists being able to just go onto Spotify and just release their music, SoundCloud. There's no more barriers to entry anymore, so we're just getting a
Yeah.
lot more. I think it's a good era. It's
Oh, that's what I love about
yeah.
the fact that these people, these bands can be independent and create, they create their own world without a record company breathing down their neck.
And that's the
You
thing.
know?
It's like with the jam band model, it's really just get a fan, cult following, whatever you want to call that, and then they just follow you around everywhere. And then it doesn't really matter whether you write an album or not. It's like, just keep selling shows, and that people make more money from the shows anyway. No one makes money from streams. Streams is like a
Mhm.
10% of a cent or something, or like 100th of a cent. Like every stream, you make nothing from streams. They make money from merchandise. That's why Fish has to sell merchandise at the shows. They make more money from merchandise than like the tickets, I think, because like they have to tickets split with the venue and like all the it's like, so it's so basic, but like you basically have to have this whole thing just to make money as a musician, and it's not just writing a song and then selling the song.
Yeah.
That's not it. It's like there's a whole thing. So I think it's great that all these people are making music, and I mean, I think you living in New York City also, very unique experience for the average American. Like there's America, and then there's New York City people, and like the different New Yorkers, right? Like you guys are like literally your own thing, just because you have so much culture and city right there. You don't have to go anywhere. You never have to leave your island, and you have everything right there. So you have
It's
such a
true.
different thing. And at least I live near San Francisco, thank God. But like, there's people who live
Yeah.
in like the Midwest, and they have to drive like 4 hours to get to Chicago to see a concert or something. So it's a different
Right.
world.
Or wait for someone to come to town. It is hard.
No one's
Yeah,
coming
here-
to Des Moines. You know what I mean? Like, if you,
Right. Yeah, here in New York City, if it wasn't for the price of everything, I would go to, everything every night. But yeah, you've got your Lincoln Center, and you've got your. There are more Grateful Dead cover bands in the New York City, New Jersey metro area than I have ever seen at this time. And that's considering how many cover bands might have been around in the 80s, in the 90s. in the 2000s.
Mm.
There are cover bands that are playing everywhere. And most of them are Grateful Dead cover bands, but then there's also tons of small jazz bands, jam bands that are playing
Mm-hmm.
in little bars, you
Yeah.
know, and so it's popular when it comes to live music
Mm-hmm.
here. In that, and something I want to mention about about cover bands is that a lot of people don't realize, but Grateful Dead cover bands existed before the Grateful Dead were done, like well before they were done. The first Grateful Dead cover band that I ever saw was on Long Island in the 70s,
Mm.
and they were called Timberwolf, and the guy who plays piano, who played piano back then, his name's Rob Baracco, and he's in he's played with Phil 1,000 times. He's played with Bob Weir. He's played with Mickey and Bill. He's played with Phil. He's been around forever in a lot of different bands. So he's a working piano player at that level with the Grateful Dead. Um, and he started out in the late 70s as a cover band for the Grateful Dead called Timberwolf. And that's a trip. That's wild. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, but also New York has so many venues. Like you guys have like underground bars everywhere, and there's just always something going on. That's why on one hand I would love to live in New York, and on the other hand I feel like I'm so extroverted that I would just never be home, and I would just spend all my money because I would just be out at something every night. It's like too tempting. It's almost like in San Francisco there's almost never something to do on a Sunday or a Monday night. Like there's barely anything. Like you have to find, because there's salsa dancing or something every Tuesday through Saturday. You can find anything.
Mm-hmm.
But Sunday, Monday, it's really hard to find like clubs that are open or even restaurants that are open. It's not like New York where it's like open all the time. It's a big so at least that you're like, okay, I have to take 2 days off from fun. It's like a naturally built-in schedule. So then,
Right.
yeah, because even the fish shows that were here were Tuesday, Wednesday.
Right.
It's almost like there's barely any concerts that ever happen on a Sunday, Monday. Because I think that's also the service industry. They work Tuesday through Saturday. They need 2 days off. So it makes sense. But in New York, I don't think it ever stops. Like, I think in New York, you can find something any
There's something
day.
going on all the time. This is true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, there'll be, I know if I might end up going to the Forest Hills Fish shows in July. Because they're going to play in Queens.
That's coming up.
So that's coming up. That's like July 20 something or whatever.
26th, I think.
It's a possibility. So first I have Austin. I'm going tomorrow to Austin, and then let's see how those two go. And then once I get the rest of my summer planning, maybe I'll do a little trip to New York.
Are you going? Have you been going have you just been delving into the jam band type scene now exclusively for a while because of this channel, or do you mix it up with other things?
Yeah, I do.
You must mix it up
I
with
do.
some other things.
I went to Fish was the first one, April 22nd. Then like a few weeks later, I did the Billy Strings thing. Then May 26th or so was the Goose concert. And then I already have the Dead and Company thing coming up in August. But then in between there, let's see, I've seen They Might Be Giants came. I've been to Vegas to see a DJ. I went to David Guetta, and then I think it was I don't know, one of those other, one of those other Dororo, one of those DJs. And then I have other, Kesha's coming on concert. She's going to play at Shoreline. This DJ, Tiesto's coming to Stanford Frost Amphitheater. So I do other things. I'm not only exclusively doing jam bands. I was always going to regular concerts anyway. So that's the other thing that was interesting is when I first started on TikTok, because that was before I had YouTube, I had TikTok, and I went viral because of Fish. It's kind of confusing, but I was ranting about dating Fish guys, basically, and then they all attacked me online, and then I was cyberbullied, and then I was like, well, why don't I actually listen to Fish instead of just judging it, right? Then I went on a whole journey of, let me discover Fish. So that's how it all started, but it wasn't really, but then people acted as if I didn't know anything about music, right? They're like, this girl doesn't know anything, she doesn't know anything, because I didn't know about Fish, I must not know anything about music, and I'm like, one, I have a music degree from USC in opera singing. I've sung in operas and musicals. I teach piano and voice for a living. I'm literally a working musician. I just hadn't heard of jam bands. So it's I know everything else about music, and that's why I have a lot of knowledge about the Beatles, for example, obviously, because I've been doing these full album watch parties. But I had literally never heard a Grateful Dead song. So I can't explain that. I don't know how that happened, even being that I live in Palo Alto, California. I don't know how that's possible. The Dead
Yeah,
have
that
been
is
around me.
interesting.
The Dead have been, I mean, I see Dead t shirts all the time. I hear there's Dead cover bands. I see posters. I had just never once thought, let me search that
Well,
on
I think once you
Spotify.
get into, once you got into something, you went that route,
Yeah.
and and it took some time to to get away from that. But you got to go down a road, right? You got to go down a road, and that's what you did. That when I was in high school, I think I mentioned this to you on the side, is that I was into The Cure,
Mm.
and the Grateful Dead at the same time. And I don't think there was one kid in my in my school that was into The Cure and the Grateful
Cure
Dead
is
at
the
the same
Friday I'm
time.
in Love, right?
Yeah,
Friday
yeah,
I'm in love. Okay, yeah.
yeah,
Monday
yeah.
you could fall apart. Yeah.
That's
That makes
that.
sense.
Yeah, and so I will say that when I finally got to see them live, this is interesting. They were one of the best shows I've ever seen. The Cure. I saw them at the at the Nassau Coliseum in the late '80s, I think, and one of the best shows I've ever seen, and that's all Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia shows included. They blew me away, and they had real. They jammed.
Oh,
They are
really?
not a jam band, but they took some songs to places. They have a song called "In the At the Edge of the Deep Green Sea." It's maybe a 6 minute song. It was 15 minutes that night. It was beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, so you appreciate any time a band in live performance does a little jamming. So that's kind of where you get really
Oh yeah.
interested. Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh definitely. I mean, I'll listen to I'll go to shows and say, wow, this is a fantastic song. Would have been awesome if they took that vehicle and stretched it out a little bit.
Would
That
you
would have been
say
nice,
that Grateful Dead was and is your favorite band ever since you first saw them in 1977?
Favorite, I don't do favorites.
Okay.
I gotta say that. I don't do favorites. It's really hard to do a favorite because again, I like so many different genres too. Mozart,
Yeah.
he's my favorite, right?
You,
Mozart's my favorite.
he has so many
So,
works, all the and
but
they're
it's
all
a
like K233. Like there's just like so many things to
it,
listen to.
yeah. So I guess you could say, well, in the genre of classical music, Mozart's my favorite. What's in the genre of so it gets deep and complicated if you do it that way. There was I
Well,
think I
so
got turned.
some Deadheads are really religious about it. That's why. And like you'll hear Deadheads in
Yeah.
the comments being like the Grateful Dead are the best band of all time, and no one else. I'll get comments like that, so that's why I asked. But
No,
it's
I
good that
mean,
it's good that you're very broad. I like that.
hey,
It's like
Bill Graham was one of the closest guys to the Dead, and his saying was that they're not the only ones who do what they do, but they're the best to that do what they do. That was his. It was a little wordy. But he was known for that, and he posted it outside the Fillmore anytime he could. And it's totally true. They really were the only ones that did what they did. So how do you can't compare that to anything? Plus, I was on the bandwagon early of never really comparing anything in music. There used to be this magazine when I was young called Cream Magazine, and it would highlight guitar players, drummers, and it would say who's the best guitarist? Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, or Jimi Hendrix? No, I'm not gonna pick. They're all different. There's not one that's better than the other. So I've always adopted that philosophy.
that's good. I mean, I think that gives you a much more well-rounded, balanced kind of person. And you're the nice. I mean, again, because I've had just the internet's a very interesting place. So being out there on
Oh
the
yeah.
internet, I'd say 95% of the people who watch my channel leave very lovely comments. And then there's those 5% of people where they obviously did not learn, if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all, right? Like that's like a very just, I learned it from Bambi as a kid. That's what Thumper says, I was like, oh, that's a good like
Yeah.
way to live your life. But they obviously have it and they just have to write like the meanest things and you're just like, okay, like, are you okay, sir? Like, can I
Yeah.
send a social worker to your home? Like,
Oh my.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and creativity and music and all these things that we talk about in the arts, it's all subjective to everyone.
I know.
Everyone has their own opinion about it, and when you're a creator and not just a consumer, like you are, you're a consumer and a creator. So then you're taking on a different kind of philosophy there because of the fact that what you're creating as far as I'm like I write songs too, and I'm not inspired. I really find it hard to be inspired
Mm-hmm.
to and or motivated to
Mm-hmm.
do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So thankfully it's not my I don't have to make a living at it. But I enjoy it, and I kind of only want to do it when I'm inspired.
Yes.
You know, I don't force myself to try to do it. And that's the way that I can enjoy it most, I guess, you know. But other people are different. And so for instance, like we're talking about Mozart or Jerry, you know, there's something compelling. They can't not sit and create something or constantly be noodling on his guitar. He was always doing something. He was playing a gig anytime he could, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, there's that, and you got to appreciate that, you
Yeah,
know.
definitely.
And I think for you had mentioned this the other day that you're a songwriter, and that you're taking, you know, you're getting your influences from wherever you can. And I think it's fantastic that this is something that you came upon rather than not coming upon it, is somebody,
Yes.
a writer like Hunter, you know, like
Yes.
Robert Hunter. You know, it's like even if you don't, even if you just listen to it and and take your time over a period of time, you'll absorb it somehow,
It
and it
does.
could
It
come
does
out.
get
It could come
absorbed.
out.
I think it
Yeah.
will. I mean, I think it will. Like I have 7 songs out right now. And then the funny one was when I did a video, which was like Fish inspired one of my songs. It's because I just heard YEM, You Enjoy Myself, and they do
Mm.
the vocal a cappella. And I was in the middle of writing a song, and I was like, God, what should I do for this bridge? And it was kind of written, but I didn't know how to orchestrate it because I put in all sorts of synthesizer, like a fake harp, and like, you know, I'm like orchestrating these things. And then I'm like, oh my God, what if I did the bridge as a vocal a cappella? And then I did. And I was like, wow. And it only happened because I happened to be listening to YEM right at the time I was writing that song. And so now I have a bunch of songs that are like, they're in construction. Like I wrote them, it was all a big breakup album. And now I don't have the pain of the breakup on me anymore. And the pain of the breakup is what got me so inspired to finish those 7 songs. It was like, no eating, no sleeping, no, I'm just gonna stay up late and write these songs. There's nothing else I could do to cope with the breakup. It was the only thing I could do. And then I got to a point where now I'm like feeling so much better. And now doing this channel gives me the same kind of creativity outlet without all the like, let's sit in the past kind of thing. So then I'm like, but I still started at least 6 other songs that are about the breakup. So if I finish them now, I have to kind of come up with a new. So I think having this Grateful Dead stuff, I've already been like thinking about like, whoa, that's so cool. Like for example, a few of the Dead songs I hear, they, like I mentioned earlier, they sing and then there's like a guitar counterpoint that comes in the blank space, and I was like, oh, I think in one of the songs I do, I need to put in more of that in the interludes. Because I'm a
Mm.
singer, I'm so vocally focused. Like I'm so focused on the melody of the voice and the melody of the chord progressions. I wasn't thinking about the space in between the melody. And so the Grateful
Yeah.
Dead has already brought that up for me in thinking about future songs, I guess, is
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
You know, I sing and play drums and percussion, and I played with bands that mostly Dead Dylan type bands and stuff over the years. I don't do it as much now as I used to, but you would think that in where I started from, getting into the Dead and that kind of music, with Dylan and the band and all that, that's the kind of stuff that I would write. But it's not because to me, I mentioned The Cure, and I love that stuff. But to me, when I started to listen to Peter Gabriel, I was like, this guy, to me, that's where it hits. Like, boom, that's the stuff. That guy writes a song that I love. I love the way he writes songs. I love the lyrics in his songs and everything about the way he composes stuff. And so I went in that direction, and totally not Grateful Dead type style stuff, you know. So I think that all of us need to we always need to keep an ear out for something else that might be different from where we are, because again, there's you know there's so many people that are probably watching your dead reactions and stuff, and you know a lot of them are strictly Deadheads, like you said before. They're just, oh, they're the best band, and oh, you know, I've seen them, and I always go to see jam bands, and I know people that always go to see jam bands, and they don't really mix it up.
Hmm.
And I think mixing it up is the most important
I
part of it. I mean,
agree.
I went to see wife and I went to see the band Air. Do you know Air?
I've heard of that. Isn't that
They're
old? Like from the
no,
their
no, no,
new?
no. Well, they're not. Well, they're old. They've been about 20, 25 years, but they're French. They're a French duo. They
Ah,
started as a French DJ band,
okay.
you know. And I love stuff like
Oh, I see
Morchiva
them. Okay,
and
Air,
you know,
Spotify. Playground
yeah,
Love with Gordon Tracks. All I Need, featuring Beth Hirsch. Okay, I found them. They're French. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
So I mean, that's that stuff. Um, that stuff is just as important for me to listen to, and classical as listen to the Grateful Dead. Plus, I try to listen to Dark Side of the Moon at least once a week.
Really? Okay, well, I need to
Oh yeah.
review that album because I've never heard the whole album.
Oh man, I
That's gonna
saw
be a good
some.
episode, huh? I heard people say that gets a lot of views. Like, I gotta do
Oh,
a full reaction to the Dark Side of the Moon. I've never heard it.
that album is just it's a masterpiece.
Okay.
It's an absolute
Well,
masterpiece.
maybe when I finish all the Beatles albums, I still have like five more Beatles albums. I can't believe how, and then I have to do all the singles that weren't on albums. So I'm like, oh my god, I'm never gonna get through the Beatles. Like, though I'm doing it, I'm kind of mixing it up now. I had to do all the Beatles because I was on a 2 week vacation, and so I pre-recorded a lot of the episodes so that one episode would come out every day while I was traveling for 2 weeks. So it was actually more of like I was just being a workhorse. I was like, okay, I gotta have an episode come out every day. What can I do that's like easy for me? I was like, oh, the Beatles. I know them really well, you know. So
For me, the Beatles are like the Beatles and the Dead are amazing to me. But I mean, the Beatles are there's only a handful, two, three, four, five songs that I don't want. I don't like listening to drive my car for some reason.
yeah,
Um,
baby, it's stupid.
but yeah,
Dun,
um,
dun, dun, dun. I skip it too. I'm
but
like,
all the Beatles stuff is just it's a masterpiece.
yeah,
They're geniuses, every one of them. That was amazing. You know, when people say, "Oh, the Rolling Stones are the Beatles," always the Beatles for me.
yeah.
They that was chemistry that hit for 10 years, like nothing else ever.
And
So I
then the
mean,
fact that they only had those 10 years. I can't even believe how
yeah,
many things they released in such a short amount of time. And then
yeah,
again, I think, what if John Lennon hadn't died? I think about it all the
yeah.
time. But all the other Beatles went on and had great long careers.
Yeah, I ran into speaking of New York City, I was in a deli about 2 years ago, and I'm waiting. It was during the no, it was a couple of years ago. It was during the pandemic, just after the pandemic, and I'm waiting to pay for something, and in walks a woman, and behind her a guy, and there was no one in the store, and I could hear her talking in a British accent, and to him. And then behind him, he replied to her, and I said, "That's Paul," because he lives up here on the Upper East Side, and I said, "That's Paul," and like right out of my mouth, I go, "Hey Paul, how you doing?" No, what did I say? I go, "Hey Paul, what's up?" And I just knew it was him, and he hit me on the shoulder like this
Hmm.
with the back of his hand. He goes, "Hey man, how you doing?" And he walked back into the deli with his
That's
wife.
amazing.
Hey
I
man, how you
mean,
doing? I love that.
yeah, well, he has a very distinct voice. So
Oh yeah,
yeah, his singing voice sounds so much like his talking voice. You just know how he sounds. It's very distinct. That's so cool. Those are such good New York stories. I mean, that's what there's so many famous people that live in New York City, and you could run into them anywhere. It's like famous people. They're just like us, you know. Like so you have
they
more of
can
those
be.
experiences because I think you run into more people. Like in LA, you might see a celebrity, but they're in a car. You can't access them and access them. But in New
Yeah,
York, it's like everyone's just walking, and you have a better chance of running into people. It's probably a better city. I mean, I used to live in LA, but New York just, it's, yeah. Anyway, well, this was a lovely conversation. Probably should wrap up now just because we did an
yeah.
hour 42, by the way. This is going to be the longest interview yet. It's going to be epic, so can't
Whoa.
wait to release it. I know, it's going to be really good. People are going to watch this one to the end, so.
Oh good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Yeah, and check out that Mother McCree's
Yes, I saw the
thing
links.
because that you said you're from Palo Alto, and that was in Palo Alto in
I know. I'm actually
1964.
going to do an episode where I drive around and I go to the places that are famous for like the dead. Like they have a
Oh
place
yeah.
they used to do poetry, and then there was like the St. Michael's Alley, which was a coffee shop. Now it's a restaurant, but
Hmm.
it's they used to hang out there. So the store where they met, it's no longer a music store, but the building exists. So like I can like
Right.
record on the ground. And then I was gonna locally because so many people knew them. There's a lot of older people that live here that were there then, and I'm gonna like write on Nextdoor and ask if anyone wants to be interviewed. Who are these actual original Deadheads who were at the acid tests? They're here, so they're in my
Yeah.
town because our town is very geriatric. So
Yeah.
there's all these like 80, 70,
Oh,
and
what
80
town? Where are you at?
Palo Alto, but there's a lot of.
You're still in Palo.
I
Okay.
am, but I'm
Right.
saying there's a lot of geriatric people here. It's like a
Yeah.
very, it's all tech. All the new people are tech and young, but
Hmm.
anyone who, there's a lot of people who still own their houses from back then, and they've been here since the 70s, and
Yeah.
they're still here. So
Yeah.
I
There's
think
that
I
the
gotta
house
find
where
them.
the house where they named the band the Grateful Dead is probably still sitting, probably still
Yes,
standing
I
too.
can go there
Yeah.
and I can do a little filming, and so I have a unique
You got
opportunity.
Haight-Ashbury, that whole
Yes,
area.
yes. So there's a
Yeah.
lot to do. So
Oh, so
anyway,
one other
yes.
thing I want to mention is the Grateful Dead movie,
Oh yes.
which is coming. I don't know if you were aware of the movie previous to our conversation. They made a movie in '74. It was released in '74, '75, something like that. Maybe even later, maybe '76. But anyway, it took a while for them to post it because it took money and they didn't have it. Big story. Jerry had a lot to do with directing it and whatnot, and it came out in theaters. It came out in theaters mostly on the East Coast, but I'm not sure about the West Coast too. And we would go. I was in like eighth grade or something, and we would actually go to these movie theaters, your local movie theater, and they would play this Grateful Dead movie, and you could walk in with cases of beer. You could smoke weed there. It
Wow,
was
what a
so
time! What
fucking
a time
crazy.
to live, you
It
know?
was so fun. It was like going to a show. It was just like going to a show, and they would do it every Saturday night at midnight, and we'd go every Saturday at midnight. So anyway, but now they've remastered it into IMAX format, and it's going to be in select theaters, probably be in San Francisco for sure.
Oh, we have an IMAX
And
theater,
and
yeah.
I
Okay.
would highly suggest seeing that movie. It is, I think, one of the best produced, one of the best filmed,
Okay.
and edited and shot
Well, I'll try
movies.
to see it in the
Yeah.
theater then because I want to see it in the big screen because it's
You
not
did.
the
I mean,
same on a.
you could click on YouTube and see it because it's there. But yeah, go see it in the theater. It's going to be in August, middle of August.
Great. Okay. Well, so nice to talk to you
You
today,
too,
and
Erica.
have
Yeah,
a great night.
yeah.
Hopefully we
And we'll
chat
be in
soon.
touch again.
Yes.
Call,
Yes. I'll email
reach
you
out
back.
anytime.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Take care, Erica. Thank
Bye.
you.